Sears Law Library is Brian Detweiler. He will speak today on how you can remotely locate the best free or low-cost, reputable legal research. Brian is a student services and legal technology librarian. He holds a JD from Notre Dame Law School, an MLS from the University of Buffalo, and a BS from SUNY Brockport. He is an attorney and practiced law with the Legal Aid Society in Rochester before beginning his library career at UB in 2014. Thank you, Brian, for presenting today. Also joining us on the call is the director of the Sears Law Library, Elizabeth Edelman. Before we begin, I want to express our great appreciation to the William S. Hahn and Company for their wonderful support. They have made it possible for paid members of the UB Law Alumni Association to have access to the entire Hahn Online Library, a $600 value, and not just the law journals and law reviews. Our annual dues are only $75. We need you now more than ever. We hope you will consider becoming a member of the Law Alumni Association, which can be done through the UB Law website. We will now start the program. You will be muted during the course of the presentation. If you have questions at any time, please use the chat room and Brian will answer you. Brian, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Dean Eileen, for that introduction, and thank you all for coming, and good morning. I will be going over several free and low-cost sites this morning with you, as Dean Eileen said. And while there are often multiple websites where you can find this information, the ones I'm going to go over with you today are the ones I usually recommend, especially when dealing with pro se patrons or attorneys who do not have immediate access to Lexis or Westlaw when they call or email the reference desk for assistance. And while these are my recommended websites, you may be familiar with others, and that's certainly okay. Keep using those if you like them. You'll also see that these free websites certainly have their limitations when compared, especially with commercial databases like Lexis and Westlaw. Nevertheless, I think you may find them useful from time to time, and they certainly can save you money if you can utilize those in lieu of and in addition to Lexis or Westlaw. As Eileen said, if you have any questions as we go along, please use the chat feature. I'll try my best to kind of monitor that and address those questions as they come in. We'll also hopefully have some time for sort of a general Q&A at the end if you want to save your questions. I'm certainly happy to stay late and speak with anyone who'd like to hang out past 10 o'clock. My kids have been home from school for like a month and a half, so I'm not exactly in a hurry to get out of here. I don't know if some of you guys are in the same situation as I am. So let me make sure I can share my screen. And okay. Hopefully you are all seeing my Google screen now. Without further ado, I thought we could get started with where to find free online access to New York State statutes. Apologies to folks who are out of state. We're going to do some New York State stuff first, and then we're going to move on to federal resources and then case law, and close up with a few additional resources as well. So the easiest way to find New York State statutes is just to Google laws of New York. I'll probably give you guys sort of Google directions for the most part in lieu of sort of these long convoluted URLs moving forward, because that's just kind of the quickest way if you want to make note of how to find this stuff. And once you find the sites that we'll be looking at, you can, of course, bookmark anything you want once you're back on your own computers. In terms of New York State statutes, the one site I would recommend is actually the second from the top, which is the state legislature's website, public.leginfo.state.ny.us. Okay, and here we are at the statutes landing page. And I realized, like, graphics wise, it's not much to look at. It kind of looks like it was developed about the same time as, Pac-Man or Super Mario Brothers. But it does work, fairly well, considering it has some very, very basic search functionality. So when they say up here, search word or phrase, that's really what they mean. It's really basic. Even an and or search operator can kind of throw things off. So As you can see from this highlighted note here, the site is up to date through Chapter 88 of the laws of 2020, and that was signed into law in late April. So we're about a month behind in terms of currency when using this site. Additionally, the titles below that are all highlighted. So if you wanted to browse through the site rather than search, you can certainly click and then access the laws that way. And if we scroll down past the consolidated laws, you're going to notice they also provide access to the unconsolidated laws, which are statutes that don't necessarily fit very well within the consolidated titles above. They also provide access to the court acts, the Senate and Assembly rules, and the New York State Constitution, New York City Administrative Charter, Administrative Code, and the City Charter as well. So most of the time you're going to be searching. Like I said, it is fairly basic search functionality, but let me show you how that works. So let's say we get a call from a client who was arrested on a weapons charge for violating the New York SAFE Act provision that prohibits having more than 7 rounds of ammunition in a gun magazine. So I would just search the phrase 7 rounds and spell it correctly, hopefully. And usually I would advise people to put phrases in quotes, but that actually doesn't work on this website for whatever reason. So if you are going to search a phrase, leave out the quotation marks. Okay. And once we have our search results here, there are 3 results, and the final one here, 265.37, is actually the one we're looking for. So once we bring up the section in question, you're going to see the text of the statute, which tells us that it is indeed unlawful to knowingly possess an ammunition feeding device that contains more than 7 rounds of ammunition. But you're also going to notice that there's certainly certain common features that you're accustomed to when you use Lexis and Westlaw, important features in fact that are missing. So right, there's no flag or other indicator at the top of the page telling us whether this is still good law or whether there's some questions about its validity. There are no citing cases provided. There's also no history line or credit section below the text, which we usually see, which indicates when a provision was enacted and if it's been amended. Now, some of that information is available. So if you click amendments, for instance, up here, it'll tell us at least that this section was amended by the Chapter 57 of Laws of 2013, specifically Section 2, Part FF. But there is no mention of the SAFE Act itself, which was when this law was enacted, and that was Chapter 1 of the Laws of 2013. And for whatever reason, they don't provide that information. Another feature, if we go back to the text that the website offers, is the ability to easily check the rest of Article 265 related sections. I often recommend that our students do this when they're reading statutes or regulations, that they locate through keyword searching, because whenever you're searching by keyword, you're obviously just pulling up links to individual sections themselves. And since the codification process generally results in similar sections being placed next to each other, or at least adjacent to each other, you typically want to take a step back and look at the related neighboring section to see if there's anything that's also relevant for your issue. So in this case, you can do it by clicking on Article 265 here, and then you can simply scroll down and you see our sections here, 265.37, and there's also one 265.36, which may also be relevant, for instance, if your client was found with a high capacity magazine, in addition to having more than 7 rounds in it. Okay. Returning to 265.37, again, there's no citing cases, and there's nothing to indicate that there may be a problem with this law, which if we go to Westlaw Edge and we bring up this law there, it's pretty immediately apparent that there is an issue, there's a red flag, right? And if we look at that, we'll find out, actually, we pull up this case, we'd see that the Second Circuit found this particular section unconstitutional as violating the Second Amendment. So unfortunately, when we're looking at that section here, there's no indication of that. So basically, it's just something that you should keep in mind. It's one of the key takeaways essentially from this website, and we'll see that holds true for the other websites we'll be looking at. That you should just definitely update any laws you're going to rely on using a commercial database, because the free sites just unfortunately don't provide that capability. Now, in addition to accessing codified statutes, you can also use the state legislature's website to view enacted and proposed legislation from the mid-1990s to present. If we go back to the home screen, you can use the drop-down menu here to enter bill and chapter numbers by year if you have the citations, or you can use this word search option, which they kind of buried at the bottom here. There, so if we want to do a word search for pending legislation related to contact tracing, for instance, which I know is, I'll try to hopefully open up the state. Again, we're not going to use quotation marks, even though this is a phrase. And we're also going to want to check these boxes. For some reason, the default is just to bring up the status, which is just sort of the short snippets of where the bill is in the legislative process. But we also would certainly want to see the text, the summary, and usually the sponsor's memo as well. So we click those boxes and click search. And we see there's 4 results at the moment in terms of bills that deal with contact tracing. And if we click just the last one, for instance, we can bring that up. And we have the status here. It's been referred to the Committee on Codes. And then we have the text of legislation. Anything that's underlined in green is new. If they have any red, actually I don't see any, there's usually red strike through text indicating that they've removed language from the existing statute in their proposal. And we'll see that this actually deals with contact tracing, and it makes the dissemination of contact tracing information, unlawful dissemination of that information, a Class E felony. Unfortunately, there's no bill tracking feature on the state legislature's website. So if that was something you wanted to do, you could either kind of set your own calendar reminder to kind of come back on here yourself periodically, or you can go to the New York State Senate's website, because they have an alerts feature. So let me show you how to get to that. If we just go back to Laws of NY again on the Google screen, which was our initial search, the first entry is the Senate's website. So from here, you just click on bills and laws, and then we'd say, click search bills, and we can run the same search here, which I've already done. Again, no quotes on the State Senate website as well, even if you want a phrase. So just leave the phrase without quotation marks. And I think this was the bill we just saw from Chris Jacobs, Senate 8327. And then if you enter your email address over here on the side of the screen, they will send you emails, as the bill moves forward in the legislative process. So I've not done that. I don't know how regularly they update it and how those emails come in, but it is something that's available to you. And lastly, in terms of statutes, at least for the state, if you ever need to do legislative history research, you can access bill jackets for bills and vetoes back as far as 1995 on the State Archives website. I would just recommend Googling New York State bill jackets or bill jackets online. And then the second option here is going to be the one you'd want to use. It's the State Archives website. From the landing page, just click View the Bill and Veto Jacket Collection. And it's going to take a minute to load here. So they have several sort of examples here that you can click on. Typically, when you come to this website, I'm assuming you probably have a chapter in here in mind. So I'll show you how to pull that up. We just use the advanced search screen. And then you can enter your chapter number under title. So if we wanted to use chapter 40 from 1998, I graduated high school. It does specify a date range, but you can just use a single year. And then click search. Okay, so here's our bill jacket here. We would just click on it. So you can click again to bring up the State Archives PDF viewer. I've just had trouble with it. It's going to crash my browser when I've done it recently. So I'm not going to do that this morning. I would just click download and recommend you do the same, since that seems to work better. Click download image, and then you can open it up and read through the file and hopefully discern some sort of helpful information on legislative intent for the benefit of your client. Okay, that's all I have for statutes, for state statutes. I don't know if there are any questions so far. If not, we can move on to New York regulations. to access New York regs, I would just Google NYCRR. And then again, select the second entry, which is actually maintained by Westlaw. If you click on the first result of the Department of State's website, they actually don't provide access to the NYCRR. So select that second one from Westlaw. And once you hit the landing page, you can browse the NYCRR by selecting the hyperlink titles, or you can use the search option at the top right-hand side of the screen. From here, you can either run a standard word search sort of across the database. This is the most general and probably the one you would use most often. You can also run a search for specific sections, so you can search within titles, parts, or section headings. So for instance, if we wanted to look up the state regulations related to how public schools are supposed to manage concussions in high school athletes, and we know that Title 8 deals with education, we can enter Title 8 here and then enter the term concussion in the section headings. And that's going to search all the section headings within Title 8 for the term concussion. Then when we bring up the actual section itself, we'll see, again, it's fairly basic. You'll notice looking at the section, just like the New York Legislature's website, there are no annotations, no references to case law, no shepherd signals, anything like that. In fact, there's not even a credits for history line here, which is something that we typically do see even on the free website. And that can certainly be helpful, but it's not here. We just have a notice that the site is current through the end of January of this year. So again, very bare bones. And in terms of the sort of credits or history line being missing, interestingly, I heard that the history section is missing from the site because the New York Department of State has asserted copyright ownership of that information, which is kind of unfortunate. But given that there was actually a recent Supreme Court decision that declared Georgia's annotated code fell under public domain, we'll see if anyone challenges the Department of State on that. I sort of hope that they do, because I mean, that sort of information, if provided, can certainly be helpful for anyone wanting to check for agency intent or the background on a particular rule. So we'll keep our fingers crossed for that. And then additionally, even the sort of table of contents type information at the top of the screen is not hyperlinked, which is unfortunate because, like I said, whenever we're doing keyword searches, I always like to take that one step back to check neighboring sections. So you certainly can do that with this site. You just have to kind of open up a new window and then click through. I'm not gonna bother doing it now, but I'll just give you a sense. So we're in Title 8, we would click on that and then go to Chapter 2 and then pull up Subchapter G, etc., just to check the neighboring sections for anything relevant. In this instance, there's not anything relevant related to concussions in the neighboring sections. And just to kind of give you a sense of what this looks like on a paid site, let me bring up the section on Lexis Advance. So we do have a table of contents here next to us. We can shepherdize this section and see how it's been treated in the courts. All valuable stuff. And then at the bottom, we're going to see the statutory authority for this section. So Section 305 of the state ed law. And then we'll see a note that this was added. The final rule was promulgated on July 3rd, 2012. So certainly all valuable information. Now, since the information on the NYCRR website is, a few months out of date, we may want to check the New York Register to see if anything's happened since then. It might be relevant for our section. So instead of, let me go back to Google here, we would just Google New York Register to bring up that site. And it's actually a few down here. Again, it's maintained by Westlaw, the searchable site. So we can open that up. And here we are from the landing page for New York Register. We can look at the register issues back to 2007. So if we did have a citation, for instance, we knew we wanted to go back to the July 3rd, 2012 issue, we would just click through 2012 and pull that issue up and find our final rule for that particular section. And the other thing we can do from this page is find out how up-to-date this website is. And actually they do update it weekly as new issues of the state register come out. So that's great. Now, let me just show you how it works really quickly. If we return to the home screen, I can show you how the word search functionality works. It is, fairly basic. But if we enter in that term concussion related to that NYCRR section we saw, we have 28 search results from 2007 on that mention the word concussion, including the top two, which are the proposed and final rule for that section 136.5 that we just saw. Bring up the document. This is the proposed rule. So from March 14th, 2012, they provide the statutory authority here. So if you didn't have access to Lexis, you could at least find it here, assuming that your rule was promulgated as recently as 2007. And we also have a short statement of purpose. We have an effective date. The text of the statute is below. And then if we continue scrolling down, we'll have some additional information, regulatory impact, the objectives, costs and benefits, some additional information there, which might be helpful if you're trying to determine intent or background or something like that. Now, also, if we wanted to check for new rules that might be relevant, again, because our section is only valid through January 31st, we would just return to our search results. And then basically the easiest thing to do is just kind of scan the list for any rules that were promulgated recently, either after or around the currency date on the NYCRR website, which was January 31st. So looking at the list quickly, I won't go to the second page of results, but we can see that there was at least one passed in January of 2020. So if we bring that up, it's just an announcement of a regulatory agenda for the Office of Children and Family Services. So it may or may not be relevant depending on what exactly we were researching, but I would just use Control F to find your term, especially in a longer document like this. And it turns out that this particular agency is considering amendments to thoroughbred rules for jockeys who have been diagnosed with concussions. Oh, I see we have some chats here. Okay. Thanks, Beth, for handling that one. I think when I'm sharing my screen, I don't see them come up all the time. So my apologies if I'm not addressing the questions as they come in. Hopefully Beth can kind of help me manage that, and I'll try to keep a better eye on that moving forward. And like I said, I'm happy to hang out afterwards so we can kind of address these questions at the end as well. Okay. I think that's about all I have for New York regulations. So we can move on now to federal statutes and regulations. Now, we'll start with the US Code, and as you may imagine, we'll just Google US Code to bring that up. It's kind of the quickest way to get there. My favorite website in terms of free sources for accessing the US Code is actually the House of Representatives Office of Law Revision Council's website. So let's bring that up here. Just like the New York statutes, you can browse the code by title by clicking these expanded boxes down here. They also have a much more sophisticated keyword search capability than the state legislature website, so that's certainly a good thing. Also, if you have a site, you can go straight to it by entering your title and section here and clicking go. I also really like their advanced search feature, which is accessible in the top right-hand corner of the homepage. You can search the current version or previous versions of the code back to the mid-1990s. You can also search within titles and even sections of the code if you wanted to get that granular. And you can limit yourself. I think probably most applicable it would be if you wanted to limit yourself by title. For instance, if you knew you wanted to research something in the bankruptcy code, you can enter Title 11. Criminal law, Title 18, that sort of thing. You can also search for cross-references to particular sections elsewhere in the code, which will tell you when a particular section has been mentioned elsewhere. Now, say we wanted to see whether Olympic athletes have to pay income tax on the medals they win. Maybe our client is Michael Phelps, and he just got hit with a hefty tax bill. So we would search within Title 26 for the Internal Revenue Code, and we can run a quick search in any of the fields here. All fields is probably the most general. We can just limit ourselves to statutory text if we wanted to do that. And if we just search for the term medal, let's see what comes up. We'll click search. Okay, so we have 3 results, including the first one, which is actually the one we would want to look at. That's the correct 126 USC 74. But before we move on, one quick note, the default on this website is to sort by code order, which is not a big deal if you have 3 results, certainly, but in cases where you have a longer list of results, sometimes they're in the hundreds or more, you would want to change that to relevance. So just use that drop-down menu there and hit apply. And that way you'll have your relevant results at the top versus just sort of scattered in code order, which to me is not ideal. I don't know why they made that the default, but it's easy enough to change. Now, if we look at this section, 26 USC 74, we'll see just like the state legislature website, there's certainly no flags indicating validity or anything like that. There's also not going to be any annotations at the bottom referring us to citing cases or anything like that. The nice thing is, which we saw in the search as well, we can jump immediately to different versions of the code. So for instance, if our client was being audited on our previous tax year, it's pretty easy to bring up that previous version of the code to see what the law said then. Additionally, it's easy to jump around the website. Like I said, we always teach our students to back up one level and look at the neighboring sections. So these are all hyperlinked at the top. We can just jump right to part 2 and check neighboring sections adjacent to section 74 to see if anything is relevant. You can see the text here. And if we scroll down, our search term is highlighted. So we'll see gross income shall not include the value of any medal awarded to an Olympic or Paralympic participant. So that's good. If we scroll down a little bit further than that, we'll see that this actual subsection D was added in 2016 pursuant to Public Law 114-239. So one of the cool features of this website is they actually will hyperlink those public laws. So even back to the 50s, which I think is when this section was initially enacted, but we can bring up that particular enactment from 2016. And here it is, Olympic and Paralympic medals excluded from gross income. So that's really nice. You can click around and get to the session laws that way. Returning to the US Code homepage, I'd just like to show you a couple more things. The first is the popular name tool, which allows us to find enacted laws by popular name. So if we wanted to pull up the Defend Trade Secrets Act, for instance, we would click D and then just scroll down until that comes up. So we can bring up the public law, which is going to actually show us where the enactments were codified in the US Code by section. And if we click on the statutes at large, where are we? They're kind of hard to see. I don't know why they don't underline the statute at large site. So it's obvious that it's linked, but it is. And that'll bring up the PDF again, like we saw with the previous act. Okay. If we go back to the home page, another way to access that type of information if you're looking at public laws that I think is ultimately more helpful because it'll provide you with the section headings and a description is to return to the advanced search screen. Okay, so you see one of the fields we can search within is the credits. So if we pull that up as our option, we can put in the public law if we have it. So we can search public law 115-97 and click search. And here we are. Like I said, there's sometimes longer sections will come up here. So code order in this instance might not be great, especially if we wanted to add additional search term to kind of focus our search. So say we were looking for the term container in relation to this public law, we can add that using the field here. We can also make that, limit that search to the statutory text, for instance, or we can just leave it as a general all fields search, but let's see what happens there. Okay, so that brought us from 245 results down to 7. And again, probably want to use that relevance option instead of code order. And here we have it. And they actually have a section called removal of beer in containers or by pipeline. So I think that's pretty amazing, actually. If you learn nothing else this morning, you at least walk away knowing that there is such a thing as a beer pipeline in the tax code. It sounds like something out of a Simpsons episode or something, but I thought that was kind of cool. Okay. So far we have seen codified and enacted federal legislation on the House's website. But if you're interested in proposed federal legislation, I'd recommend going to a different site, congress.gov, which you can either just enter congress.gov in your search bar, or go to Google and search Congress, and that'll be the first result that comes up. Now, again, from the homepage, and probably because I'm a librarian, I can't help myself, I tend to always just jump to the advanced search screen. I think I do that with pretty much every database we see that has one available today. But I think it does just a better job of sort of laying things out for you, so you can see you know, what your search options are, and you have a better sense of what you're doing when you're crafting your searches. So I tend to do that myself when I'm searching, and I recommend you do it as well. From congress.gov, let's say we wanted to search for pending legislation dealing with how the government is responding to the current pandemic relating to you know, unemployment or student loans. So we can craft a quick search for that. Under words and phrases, we would select all fields. And then there is some pretty sophisticated search functionality. So let me show you some of that. So we're going to search truncated unemployment or unemployed. So that gives us unemployed, unemployment. And then we'll say unemployed or the phrase student loans, which we would enclose in quotation marks. And when you can close something in parentheses, just like a mathematical equation, it means it's going to search that first. So we'll say unemployment or student loans and COVID-19. And click search. We're searching by Congress, so we don't have to change anything up there. And we'll see what comes up. Okay, so that search returned 70 results for us. Now there's several options on the left where you can limit your results by party of the person who introduced it. You see we have a couple chat questions. Okay, thank you, Beth, sorry. We can also limit ourselves by sponsor, committee, subject. I think status is particularly helpful from time to time. So if we have 70 measures that have been introduced, you know, it looks like most are sitting in committee. So let's just bring up those that have passed at least one chamber. 3 of these have been enacted and became law, as you can see here. And 1 has passed the House and is currently waiting in the Senate. We can look at that. The HEROES Act. I think I heard about this one on the news. There is an alerts function here. If you wanted to track this or any other legislation from this summary page, you would just click get alerts and then create an account, and they will email you as the bill moves forward through the legislative process. And then you can use the tabs to jump around. If you want to just read the text of the bill, for instance, you just click that tab and there it is. So in addition to pending legislation, congress.gov is also a great free resource for federal legislative history research. So if we go back to the advanced search screen, and we know what year, for instance, which Congress the law we were looking at was passed. So if we go back to that Olympic medal income exemption law we saw a few minutes ago, the public law number for that was 114-239. You can see the sort of sample site they have here for public laws. It's not typical, so we would have to use 114 PL 239 to access that. You can also, of course, run a word search using the functionality we saw earlier, but this is the quickest way to get there when you know the site. Okay, so here we are. We have the summary that comes up by default and tells us what this particular legislation did. It did indeed become law, as we can see here. We can bring up the text of the statute if we wanted to here as enacted. And then in terms of legislative history, you probably want to go to the Actions tab. And what this is going to do is show you links to the congressional record when this measure was debated and voted on. And you can also access any reports that came up were produced during the legislative process. And these tend to be certainly the most helpful in terms of discerning legislative intent. So I would definitely check those first if I was researching legislative history of this law. You can read this, you use the HTML version that they have here, or you can bring up, download a PDF, which is probably actually easier on your eyes in terms of having to read this. Okay, if there are no questions, now we can move on to federal regulations. Again, I'm doing my best to kind of monitor what's going on, but I think because I've shared my screen, it's become a little tough, but I think Beth's been helping me out as well as questions have come up. So thank you again, Beth. Okay, so for accessing the CFR, you can either search CFR online or search eCFR. And this is the site we're looking for here. So from the landing page, you can, again, browse through the different titles if you want and just click go. They also have some simple search functionality, which is actually pretty cool. You can limit yourself to titles, particular titles of the CFR, and then they have various options in the drop-down menu if you know which sort of section or part of the CFR you want to search within. They also have Boolean and proximity search options available to you, and I do like those, as you know. So, for instance, if we wanted to research the regulations relating to the USDA's organic farming program, we would know, for instance, we'll limit ourselves to Title VII for USDA and agriculture, and we can just run a simple search for organic and produce. We'll leave it, our drop-down menu is a section on the right here. Again, that's the most general, so unless you have something specific in mind, you'd probably just want to use that default setting. And we'll click submit. And there we are. Everything's sorted by relevance, which is good. And in fact, the first entry is what we would be looking for, Part 205, which is the USDA's organic program. Once we open up the part, we'll see up here that this section is current through May 26th, which is certainly excellent. That's, I think, more up to date than Lexis or Westlaw's version by probably a week or more. If we scroll down through this sort of hyperlinked table of contents, we can go past that. You can jump to sections using those links, but I wanted to show you that they do provide the statutory authority below the table of contents, and they also provide the Federal Register citation for when this section was initially promulgated, so December of 2000. Okay, and if we pull up a section, I'll show you. So it said unless otherwise noted. So if we pull up, for instance, section 102, use of the term organic, has lots of cross references. I think this is probably kind of, in some senses, the meat of this section. And we're going to see that, yes, here's the initial citation, and then we have an amendment in volume 75 of the Federal Register, page 7193 from 2010. So just like our other free resources, there's no indication of validity, there's no annotations, just basically have the text and the credits, and no Shepherd's signals or anything like that alerting us to potential issues. That being said, and even though our section is fairly up to date, we would probably want to verify that there aren't any proposed rules on the horizon that may affect Part 205. And we can also, if we go to the Federal Register, look at proposed and final rules. Whoops, Federal Register, let's try it again. If we Google Federal Register, it's actually federalregister.gov that we're looking for. Okay, so this site is up to date pretty much through the day. As things are released, they are published on this website, which is great. So we can do, our search options are kind of hidden up here. If we had, for instance, a site that we wanted to check, let's bring up the final rule for that section we just saw on agriculture. We can just run a quick search here, and based on our citation, it says it looks like you were searching for this rule, and you just bring it up and you could read it here. This relates to the organic program. It has an effective date here from 2010, and usually I recommend actually viewing a PDF of this, because the HTML, especially when you're looking at a long page, is just kind of tough to read. So that's how you look at a proposed or final rule. If you want to do sort of a regulatory history type thing to look into the background or intent behind a rule. And also if you wanted to check and again, make sure that there's nothing affecting your section moving forward, I would recommend using this search functionality here, selecting advanced document search. And since we're in almost June of 2020, I think we're probably safe if we just limit ourselves to publication and effective dates for this year. And then there is a CFR parts affected field down here. So our section was Title VII, Part 205. So we don't even have to, do any word searches or limit ourselves by agency, which we certainly could do using the fields here. But if we know which section we're in, we can just use the parts affected fields to find if anything relevant is coming up. And in this case, we have a rule. You can tell it's a rule versus a proposed rule because it says R here. This was published on May 7th. So that's probably something we would want to look into. Excuse me, to look into. We want to check out what the effective date is. So since the effective date is actually in the future, any proposed changes to, or actually final changes would not probably be incorporated into that version of the CFR we just saw. So it would definitely be worth, looking at this to see if it was relevant for the research we were doing. And again, I recommend using the PDF version. It's just a lot easier on the eyes. And it turns out this section is renewing some rules in regards to permissible synthetic substances for organic crop cultivation and livestock. So interestingly, it's okay for organic livestock to be given aspirin. So how about that? Okay. Probably not as cool effect as the beer pipeline, I realize. Okay. Right. I think that's all I have for federal regulations. Looks like no one submitted any chat questions recently that I can see. So if we're all ready, we can jump on Google Scholar and look for case law. So the URL for that is scholar.google.com. But you can also just Google the word scholar and it will come up that way as well. And once you're on the Google Scholar homepage, the default is to search for journal articles, but we're going to look for case law. So you would just click that option there. You can then specify your jurisdictions by clicking select courts. And if we wanted to limit ourselves to Supreme Court and Second Circuit, for instance, we would do that and just click done. Then we're ready to run our search. So in this instance, I thought we could run a search for legislative prayer. Since as a native Rochesterian, I thought we could check out that Supreme Court case from the town of Greece from a few years back. And when we run that search, the Supreme Court case is actually the second in our results list. If you have 109 results, so that's, they're all ranked by relevancy, that's not terrible. But you do have some options on the left if you wanted to limit yourself by date, for instance, maybe the last 10 or 20 years, just to make it more manageable. But let's bring up this opinion really quick. And we're going to notice we have basically the West Supreme Court Reporter pagination, 134, Supreme Court 1811. You can tell by the site. And you can also tell, since it starts at 1811 and then jumps immediately to 1815, we're missing some headnotes, unfortunately. So they don't incorporate, the headnotes of the digest. Obviously, that's, proprietary to West, and they don't want to have that released to us for free. We also, of course, don't have any key site flags or anything like that that tell us how this decision has been treated in subsequent cases. We just have basically the opinion and this short summary here to go on. Now, they don't have key sites certainly, but they do have, I guess, sort of a quasi-citator in the sense that we can use this feature up here called House Cited, which will provide a list of cases that have cited to our underlying opinion. In this case, 857 of them. Unfortunately, they don't provide any sort of, editorial analysis or anything telling you whether these citations are positive or negative, and what they may have cited the underlying case for. This can become a problem. Let me pull up the previous version of that case. 681 F3rd 20 is the citation for the Court of Appeals, Second Circuit Court of Appeals opinion that was actually reversed by the Supreme Court opinion we just looked at. So if we pull up House cited for that.
Can I just ask you something, just because you're getting deeper into it?
Yes.
How do you limit the material in answer to a search as to just cases?
I'm sorry, limit the material in a search to
just case law versus, an article in the Legal Lawyer Review in Manhattan or something.
Right. Right. That's the first thing you do actually when you're on Google Scholar.
Yes.
As long as you click case law straight away, you won't get that.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just missed that. I see it. Okay.
Oh,
I
oh yeah, no problem
apologize
at all.
because I could see you click something. I have never seen that. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, it's Google, so the search functionality itself is great.
Yeah.
Now the downside is, of course, the house cited is not perfect in terms of being a citator. So this is the house cited screen for relating to this Second Circuit Court of Appeals case from 2012. And if you pull up all citing documents, all 124, they don't actually point you towards the Supreme Court case that reversed this decision. So obviously that's a big problem. I don't know how they missed it. I mean, I suspect maybe this particular citation, 681 F3rd 20, maybe the Federal Reporter wasn't published yet, so they used a different site when the Supreme Court referred to the case when they reversed it. I'm not sure, but certainly, that's kind of a big problem if you're ever going to rely on this in terms of being a citator. So just yet again, you have to kind of go back to Westlaw, Lexis, or Bloomberg and use those commercial citators to verify any case law you're going to find on here. Let's see. In addition, let me go back to the homepage here. You can use Google Scholar as kind of a makeshift statutory or regulatory annotation generator. We saw, a lot of those, statutes we looked at didn't necessarily, have any citing cases listed. So we can kind of do that ourselves if we input a section. So if we did 26 USC 74, we'll get, and I think I probably should have enclosed that in quotes, but we would have a number of results citing our section. And if we wanted to, and it certainly varies by what you're going to look at. Sometimes when you use this, you just kind of get an unmanageable number of cases. If you input, 501c3, for instance, I think you get, 250,000 results or something like that. So in that instance, you would want to sort of limit yourself by inputting some additional search terms, making sure you're limiting your jurisdictions, that sort of thing, using these options on the left. And if we wanted to look at that provision that was invalidated in the state statutes dealing with ammunition, we just searched that there, and we have only 5 results, including Judge Scretny's decision from the Western District here in Buffalo, and the Second Circuit decision in that case. So if we use the state statutes in conjunction with Google Scholar here, I think we'd probably be okay. We would have found out that there was an issue with that particular section. Okay. All right, I think that pretty much covers our bases in terms of the sort of free websites I was going to show you, but I did want to let you all know about a couple of additional resources before we wrap up. The first of these is Fastcase, which is free for New York State Bar Association members. Let me just jump there. I've got it, the site bookmarked. You can always just Google NYSBA and get there that way as well. They didn't let me log into Fastcase this morning, so let me see if they've addressed that. If not, I can use the library homepage to get there. So let's see if they've got that straightened out. Yeah, it doesn't look like they do. Let me see. Yeah, usually there's a little blue icon here to log into Fastcase, which is not here for some reason. So it looks like they're having some kind of technical difficulty at the moment. Either that or maybe I broke it because I was on it so much in preparation, messing with this thing. So fortunately, the law library.
It says log in here.
Yeah, I click it and then nothing happens. I don't know. I'm signed in. I was messing with it this morning. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what happened. But the law library does have access to, so I can at least show you what it looks like if you guys aren't familiar with that. And again, if you are members of NYSBA, that is something you might want to take advantage of yourselves. But we'll just go to the law library's version. Okay, good. We could at least log on here. And the homepage looks essentially the same whether you log in through our subscription or through the NYSBA's. Now from the homepage, you have several options available to search within, including federal and state statutes, regulations and case law. They have this sort of prominent search bar up here, just like Lexis and Westlaw does. But I'd recommend, clicking on the actual library you'd like to search within before entering your search terms. When you do that, it actually will give you some options, in terms of advanced searching. So we'll have options for Boolean, natural language searches. They do have examples down here, so they give you a sense of what their Boolean options are. Natural language would be more like just, plain old throwing something into Google, and then they have a citation lookup as well. So like I said, there was that problem with that Second Circuit case on how cited, so they didn't flag that in any way and let us know that there was an issue with it. But if we bring that up here, let me show you what that opinion looks like on fast case. Here we are, Galloway versus Town of Greece, and we'll bring up the opinion. Just looking at the opinion, first off, we'll notice, basically there are no headnotes or anything like that, unfortunately. It's basically just the opinion and then a short synopsis. The thing that really sort of sets fast case apart is that they have something called authority check. So if we click on that, we have 22 citations from the database that cite to our underlying case. And we're looking at the screen here. And if we scroll down here, we're going to see something called a bad law bot. Now, Fastcase is very clear. They don't term this a citator because they don't have sort of an army of attorney editors reading cases and assigning treatment flags like Westlaw does, for instance. But what this authority check and bad law bot does specifically is use a computer search algorithm to find instances of the citation and then sort of scan the neighboring language associated with that citation for language like reversed or overturned or that sort of thing. So it'll just know at least to flag that for you. So this is what it looks like here. It says that this opinion may have been reversed, and indeed it was. And they also flagged a couple of things down here saying, cert granted in previous cases. So this is definitely the sort of thing you would want to look at. The only issue I think I have with this is that it's not quite as clear as it could be. So if we jump back to the opinion, there's no red flag or anything up here telling us or alerting us that there might be a problem, which case, if you pull up another opinion, Plessy versus Ferguson, which has been bad law for decades. So let's look at that and I'll show you the difference. There's even a red flag here in the search results, but if we bring it up, here we have, negative treatment indicated in bright red for us. So I don't know why that didn't come up in that Town of Greece versus Galloway. I'm not sure why it wasn't more prominent, but just, I guess, keep in mind that you'd always want to go up here and click on the results just to make sure that what you're looking at is at least hopefully good law still. And, honestly, even if you were on, Lexis or Westlaw, we tell our students to always check on that anyways. You'd never rely on a single flag alone, right? I mean, a case can deal with multiple issues and only be bad law for one point of law when the other holdings are still okay. Or maybe, a holding was limited in some way that's not necessarily relevant to your facts at all. So obviously just, way too much, nuance and complexity in the law to rely on, a stop sign to encompass all the analysis that's needed. All right, so if we return to the home screen, in addition to case law, Fastcase does provide access to federal and New York State statutes and regs. So let me show you that really quickly. We'll just do a quick citation lookup of that Internal Revenue Code section we saw earlier. And we're gonna have to check United States Code before we click search so it knows that that's where the citation is that we're looking for. And if we bring up that section, it's going to essentially look, the same as what we saw on the House of Representatives website. Okay, we'll scroll down. Yep, they have the amendments and the history line there. But the difference here is they actually do provide us with some case law, which is, I think, great. 18 results here listed, citing our case, certainly better than the 0 that we had on the House's free website. However, by way of comparison, maybe it's not, quite as sophisticated as Westlaw, because if you look at this case on the statute on Westlaw, there are, I think, 35 cases in that topically organized notes of decisions tab. and then links to over 100 cases overall. And that the fact that that notes of decisions tab is organized by topic is especially helpful to researchers when you're usually looking at annotations for a particular issue. You want to find out how that statute is going to apply to a fairly specific set of facts. So that topic organization can really be helpful, in terms of limiting yourself to reading cases that are going to be relevant versus, maybe having to sort through a bunch that don't have any bearing on your issue. And unfortunately, there is no real topical breakdown here. But that being said, it's certainly, better than nothing, because you can get a sense of how cases have treated this section. Okay, and we can check the state statutes too. I'll just show you if we run a quick search for, I think we'll just do 7 rounds again if we're going to bring up that SAFE Act provision, and we'll check New York statutes. Let me show you that, because there is an issue with this section. As we'll see, we were looking at 265.37 unlawful possession of certain ammunition feeding devices. And we see I can't actually scroll down because there's nothing besides the text of the statute. So for whatever reason, they did not catch that this particular section was found unconstitutional. So that's not in here. And I don't know why that is. Lexis and Westlaw certainly are not perfect either. But given this sort of, pretty clear limitation here, my advice would just be to, verify the validity of any primary law you're going to rely on, either before you submit something to a court or advise a client on the matter. Use Shepard's Keycite or Bloomberg Law's Citator whenever possible. I guess the extent to which you may want to utilize for your low-cost sites is certainly going to vary. It depends on, I guess, how much you kind of value the convenience of one-stop shopping, Lexis or Westlaw, versus maybe spending a little bit of extra time to save some money. I think it's also probably going to depend on how your subscription works. So, for instance, I think when I interned at a law firm during law school, our subscription worked where we could, I think, search for free, but we only paid when we actually clicked on a document to pull it up and view it. So, if that's the case for your subscription, for instance, maybe you can, run searches in Lexis or Westlaw if you wanted to. And then anything that looked promising, you could just pull up the document on a free site to read there first. And that way, a case or a statute or anything that looks important to your case, you then go back and actually pull it up on your service to Shepardize it or use Keycite or what have you. Okay, I think that about does it for primary law, but I did want to cover one more particularly valuable resource before we wrap up. And that is, as members of the Law Alumni Association, should you be a member, you'd have free access to Hein Online. So for those of you who are not familiar with Hein Online, it's a searchable PDF-based legal database that provides access to both primary and secondary authority. So.
And what association? The alumni?
The Law Alumni Association, yes.
Okay.
So let me just log in here quickly. And you would have this login information once you register with them. And you can just click the link here, Hein Online for Law Alumni. And we'll use this link to go to the Hein homepage. Now, first and foremost, and I think this is what Hein is probably best known for, is their law journal library. It's really outstanding. They have extensive coverage of academic and commercial law reviews. It's probably the most comprehensive single website anywhere online for law journals and reviews. And I think their interface is actually pretty easy to use. So let me click on Law Journal Library and show you how to do that. Now, the one catch with Hein Online, and it's not that big a deal, but is that sometimes you'll not be able to access the most recent articles due to various publishing embargoes and agreements they have with the different law reviews. So the good news is that if this happens with an academic law review, for instance, you can usually at least just go directly to the law review's website and pull up the most recent issues for free. This often goes back a number of years. I think, for Buffalo Law Review, for instance, I think has probably last 5 or 6 years for free on their website last time I checked. So there's always that as an option. And if the article you're looking for comes from a commercially published journal, it's going to be certainly a little bit more difficult, but you can always call us here in the law library to see if we can help you find it. Okay, so like I said, the search functionality is pretty straightforward. However, as a type A librarian, I always use the advanced search anyways. so I have a better sense of what I'm doing. I think it's better for demonstrating too. So let me show you, there's several options in the drop-down menu. We have, text, which is the most general. We can specify things much more finitely using the title option. We can use an author option and search for that. We also have various options in our sort of operator drop-down menu and or within 25 words, etc. Okay, so if we scroll down, there's also an option to limit your search by topic. I actually don't recommend using this much because I find it limits my results. I think as long as we're sort of sorting by relevancy, which is their default setting, I tend not to want to limit my results because the ones that come up at the top of the list are going to be the most relevant. I don't want to mistakenly take those away by sort of limiting myself to, a topic, for instance. So I'd probably try to avoid that if I were you. You can also search within specific journal titles. So if you wanted to, search Harvard Law Review, for instance, you can go ahead and enter that there. You can also limit yourself by date if we wanted to just limit ourselves to recent years. And then in terms of search options, I usually uncheck all of these if I know I just want journal articles and just check articles, comments, and notes. So I'll run a quick search here to show you how it works. If we look for Brady and exculpatory, we could also do Brady within a certain amount of words of the term exculpatory. And we'll just run a quick search. We're looking for Brady and exculpatory in articles from 2000 through 2020. I'd also recommend, before I click search, clicking this include external articles option. Again, because like I said, sometimes those more recent articles may be embargoed. So we want to click that. And even if there's something that's not necessarily available through Hein, you might be able to locate it elsewhere. Sorry, I'm seeing, Sandra, I saw you had a question here. Was a code announced? I'm sorry, I can maybe address that later if you want to just chat to provide a little additional information on what you're asking there. Okay, so we have 2,900 results that include the terms Brady and exculpatory in the Law Journal Library. So that's quite a bit, but they are relevancy ranked. So I would just kind of go down. You can obviously, craft your search a little differently and add some additional terms to limit that in your search. And then once you find an article that looks promising, you can either click on the title itself to be taken to the start of the article, or you can click turn to page, which will bring you actually to where those terms appear in the article itself, and then you'll see that they're highlighted. And then once you're looking at the article, you can either send a link to yourself using the email option. Keep in mind this link will only work if you're signed into Hein Online, so you wouldn't want to send a link to a client or opposing counsel, for instance, if they did not have a subscription, because they wouldn't be able to open it. But you can also download a PDF of the section, and then you can save it to your computer and email it to whoever you like. And here it is. Okay. And one more thing I'd like to show you is this Scholar Check icon up here. So if we click on that, we can see it was cited by 66 articles. If it was cited by a case, you'd see that here as well. And when you click on that, it's basically just a way to find other relevant sources. So other sources that have cited that article since it was published. So just another way to kind of diversify the number of articles that you're finding. Okay, let's go back to the home page. I'll show you one more feature here. In addition to the Law Journal Library, they also provide you with access to the federal collection up here. So if you're looking for previous versions of the CFR, Federal Register, that go back before the sites we were looking for, these go back, I think, to the 1930s, to the first issuance of these particular publications. The US Code, I think, goes back to the 20s. Statutes at large, probably farther than that. And then in addition to that primary law, they also have a legislative history library, which is actually really cool. So this is a collection of document compilations related to the passage of important pieces of legislation, which definitely will save you a lot of legwork if you have to compile them yourself. It's a real pain. So let me show you what that looks like really quick. If we search B by title, B for baseball, they actually do have a legislative history related to the passage of the Curt Flood Act of 1998, which applied antitrust law to Major League Baseball. And I'll show you. You can just expand these here. You can see they're, I mean, pretty extensive documents here as part of the record, you know, hearings, congressional records, that sort of thing. So really valuable if you were going to do legislative history on something and you can find it in here. This would be one of the first places I would go. If they don't have it in here, you know, you can obviously, I think your next step would probably be to give us a call here at the law library and see if we can help you find something. Okay, now let me see, I think we did have chat, okay. I think that's about all I have for you today. But before I go, I feel like I would be remiss if I did not put in a quick plug for the law library. In particular, my reference colleagues and I, we're always happy to assist our alumni with research questions. Just stop by our homepage, law.lib.buffalo.edu, or you can always Google UB Law Library and get there that way. From the homepage, just hover your mouse over research help and select ask a question. From here, you can contact us via email at asklaw@buffalo.edu. You can enter a chat to just chat with a question, chat a question to us, and we'll answer you. Or you can give us a call at 716-645-2047. Someone will be monitoring these accounts and hopefully answering the phone over the summer during the week from 10 to 4. And I expect we'll probably, you know, expand our hours again once the fall semester starts in August. And even if we're not actually in the building this summer, typically, we are still forwarding our calls to our cell phone when we're working remotely, so we will still be here for you. Additionally, if you live in the area and you'd like to come in to access our resources, we're certainly happy to do that for you. Just let us know that you're an alumnus of the law school and you contact us. We'll be happy to work with you to find time that'll be convenient when one of us can let you in and assist you. In addition to sort of all the print resources that we have here, all those treatises and stuff you remember from your time here, we do have sort of a scaled down, slightly scaled down version of Westlaw that you can access from our law library computer terminals. That does include KeyCite if you did want to update your primary law. We also have several other databases that you might find useful, you know, depending on what you're researching. So we are just happy to help you, and we hope that we will see you, especially once we sort of return to normal, which hopefully will be soon. And here's my contact information if you guys have any questions for me. And again, our reference services information as well, if you wanted to make note of that. Are there any other questions today? I mean, if you guys are welcome to hopefully unmute yourself if anyone has a question, or just you know, type in the chat.
Brian, there was a question earlier. Are you going to make links to these resources available?
I'm sure I can throw something together, and maybe, I don't know if Eileen has everyone's email, but maybe that's the quickest and easiest way. I can certainly do that. Eileen, are you there? Is that okay?
Yes, fine.
Excellent. Okay. Yep, I can definitely do that.
Great program.
Thank you guys. Thank you.
Brian, thank you for your time and insight. Beth, thank you for manning the chat. And thank you, everybody, for Zooming in. Stay tuned for part 2.
It was excellent. Very, very good.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you guys. Take care. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.